John Giesman on behalf of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. I had a couple of questions on item 1 from Mr. McWhorter's report. PG&E has, I believe in its responses to the Energy Commission's IPER process. IPER is Independent Energy Policy Report, or Integrated Energy Policy Report. In their responses to the regular data requests that the Energy Commission promulgates in that proceeding, have identified their treatment of what they called damaged fuel assemblies. And I don't know if damaged and leaking are interchangeable terms or not.
Mm-hmm. Leaking is a subset of damage.
Okay.
Damage could be leakers or some other cause.
They indicated that their practice would be to simply insert those damaged fuel assemblies into one of the MPCs, and they felt that, I believe because the MPC is supposed to be leak tight, that was considered satisfactory from their standpoint as a means of dealing with a damaged fuel assembly. My question is whether there is an established protocol or a preferred philosophy. Do you bunch those damaged fuel assemblies in a single MPC, or do you spread them out across your entire population of MPCs? And I raise that largely in terms of whether there is or should be any special inspection protocol associated with MPCs that contain such damaged fuel assemblies.
Oh yes, indeed. This would be an issue of interest. And, of course, I'm not even sure, Mr. Giesman, what the licensing basis would allow a damaged bundle to be loaded. Right? That's one inquiry I would like to make from, to PG&E. What type of bundle is permissible under the NRC license?
Let's get the second question.
Sure. A second question, Mr. Giesman?
The second question related to the response to one of Donna Gilmore's inquiries. She had apparently expressed concern that a corrosion or a stress corrosion related crack could release large amounts of radioactivity into the environment. Mr. McWhorter indicated no, his judgment, or rather in PG&E's judgment, it couldn't. And I was searching for whether there was some quantification of what large means.
Well, we shared PG&E's judgment about that, but large is, the NRC has a regulation about how much can't be released from these things. And we concluded that it would take a much bigger breach, Rick can chime in, than she was talking about to produce something that would violate NRC's own regulations, and we thought that was very unlikely.
So there is a quantified threshold?
Yes, I think that, yes. Here
Well, actually, I think probably we want to follow up further on this because we did not look distinctly at the question of the damaged fuel, and I think that that's something that is a good thing for us to look at in storage.
That's the first part. Right?
But in general, if you have leaking fuel in a spent fuel pool, you'll put it into a canister because you need to isolate it from the spent fuel pool so it doesn't leak in the pool. It would be my expectation that canister is what's then placed into the MPC, and therefore that there's an isolation of the damaged fuel that's functionally equivalent to a undamaged fuel assembly's level of isolation. But I think this is something worthwhile for us to check up on because it's an important question clearly about storage.
Yeah, I want to say more about the thing I just said yes about, which was 90 seconds ago. The NRC has a criterion for one of these MPCs such that you violate it if more than a certain amount of radioactivity is detected. And we don't want that. Nobody wants that. And Rick can chime in to see whether he agrees with that. That's what was concluded, was that the sort of thing that Gilmore was talking about wouldn't produce anything close to that, that it would take a much larger thing than that to violate the NRC's criterion. Rick can perhaps say more.
I think Mr. Giesman has some good points that need to be followed up on. With regards to how many damaged fuel assemblies they are, where they are, that's a question that matters.
Yes.
But fundamentally, the picture is if you have a damaged fuel assembly, you're probably talking about one pin that has a crack and has leaked fission product gases out through that crack. The fuel assembly's been in the pool long enough that it's not going to melt inside. It's not, You're not going to have any kind of, you're just, all that gas has already been released. You're taking it out, you're putting it in, and you have a pin that, it's 10 years old and there's very little going on with it other than it's just radiating some heat. You may have small amount of gas coming out of that pin that if you had a small enough crack might get out. That's why, we think that there's a kind of a threshold. You really would have to have a lot of those to have a significant release, to have a significant public. But we need to know how many are out there, and we need to make sure, and the industry needs to quantify that, and it's not all clear yet.
I think I can explain the process. In the reactor, the fuel pins in the fission process, as the uranium fissions, some of the fission products are gases. Okay? Yes. And some of the fission products are solids that then themselves decay into a gas. So there are secondary products that are gases. And so if you have an intact fuel pin, it's got gas inside there that's radioactive. Now, if you have a leak of the kind that Rick mentioned and it's in the pool, all that gas that's in there that was produced in the fission process long ago is going to have been released, and there isn't much left. However, 10 years later, or 20 years later, or 30 years later, certain radioactive decays produce additional gases, and those newly produced are available for release, as opposed to the ones in the fission process, which are far more, there's a lot more of them. And you can do the calculations, we know what that is. And those turn out, those newly produced things that are going to be produced for a long, long time, are very, there's not very much of it. It's the best thing to say. Now, you can quantify that. We know what it is. You can calculate it.
Right.
Do I have that? Did I explain that right there?
Right. And then the other question is the level of risk and hazard. So with the stress corrosion cracking, you'll end up with very tight aperture cracks. So this is not like a big opening. And in general, it would be physically very difficult to get anything solid, any sort of solid material to transfer through that crack, particularly because there's very little pressure differential between the inside and the outside of the canister. So credibly, what might leak through the crack would be noble gas fission products, and those, in a practical sense, have very low level of hazard because they don't bioaccumulate, they don't deposit, they dilute rapidly, and the amounts are small. The French reprocess all of their spent fuel, and they release the noble gas fission products. So if you want to find a really big source term of noble gas fission products, you can go to a hog. and the public health consequences are minimal from that. Well, there's debate on that, but in general, I think the important thing about the dry cask storage is once the spent fuel has cooled enough that it can be placed in dry casks, the hazards are actually remarkably small compared to the risks associated with operating reactors and fuel that has been recently discharged, where you have very large inventories of short-lived fission products. And so from the perspective of safety, that's the thing that I worry the most about. And by the time it's in the dry cask, it's a significantly easier problem to manage from the perspective of risk and safety.
Hold on, I want to say something additional for the public. We don't have any 100-year-old spent fuel. If that stuff is out there for, I'm not saying at Diablo, but it's all over the world. if nothing more is done for it for a long, long time like that, we don't have any idea how long those engineered systems will remain intact. We, meaning I, or any of us, or the NRC, or PG&E, or anybody. We have a design basis that convinces people that it should last for decades and decades and decades. In fact, the NRC said they think it ought to be, a century or so, but nobody knows, which is why there's a 20-year license and a review, so that it's not a long license, it's a 20-year license, so that with a period shorter than that concern, the whole community is going to look at this more carefully. I myself, just speaking for myself, I'm real skeptical that those dry casks can be there for a century with the integrity that they have in the first 10 years. I'm just skeptical of that. Maybe, maybe not. It's not going to be in my lifetime, but I got to tell you something. Somebody's going to start thinking about that soon, because the oldest ones are already now 25 and 30 years old. I mean, the first ones in the U.S. are in Surrey, and when were they? 30 years old almost. Not quite. I can't remember, but certainly more than 20. And so we're sanguine over the very short time, 5 years. Bob Budnitz isn't sanguine over decades and decades and decades. I mean, it's just that would be a stretch.
So let me ask you.
Well, if I may provide some context to this current discussion, Mr. Giesman, I happen to sit on the licensing board to approve this facility, dry cask storage. Mm-hmm. At the time, I can tell you what my reaction would have been. This issue did not surface at the time the dry cask storage license was approved.
We didn't have the experience.
Right, but there was no notice, no awareness. Just the licensing board simply did not know about this issue. Right, knowing what I know today, I can assure everybody here, I would not have approved the license for this dry cask storage without further examination of this issue. But to be fair to everybody, the license was issued. Now let's talk about what remedial action that would be appropriate.
Yeah, and the 20 years is short enough. None of us think that there's a problem in the real short term.
Right.
So if you had to repackage the spent fuel assemblies in a cask that had hit whatever its useful life turned out to be, there's presently no technology by which you could do that dry transfer, is there?
Well, there would be, but it would be really, really expensive.
The French do dry transfer, but the technology for doing that is sitting there at the site. So one of the things we need to look at with respect to decommissioning plans is timing of the decommissioning of the spent fuel pools. Because once you've done that, then at that point you would need to do something far more ambitious if you wanted to repackage at the site.
And as we've discussed before, I believe the course they're taking at San Onofre is to decommission the spent fuel
It's the
pools.
normal practice.
I mean, fair enough. Fair enough.
The chances actually that you're going to need to repackage before you can transport are probably pretty small. But this is something that is important for us to look at with a lot of care, and it's something that we've identified as future action in looking at decommissioning, because the timing of the spent fuel pool decommissioning is the point in time where you lose the capability to inspect and repackage.
Yeah, but
And your optimism is based on your service on the Blue Ribbon Commission as to how rapidly we're going to be picking up spent fuel.
Of the things we need to worry about in this world, particularly with recent administrative changes in the country, actually dry cask storage is not the highest on my list.
But John, I got to add something. When I said I was skeptical about 100 years, I don't have a lot of concern, this is my engineering judgment, with the integrity of that outer concrete that's reinforced. The concern is inside it are assemblies with fuel rods whose mechanical integrity is not assured over a very, very long time. So you get a crane in there and you have to lift something, and we just don't know.
Right.
Okay? And That's why we have these 20-year license and a vigorous review that's going to be going on.
Thank you very much.
Sure.